Hi, this is Stefan, and welcome to Couch Theater. My guest this week is Greg, and the basic idea of this podcast is to get more people to enjoy more movies. Well, today's movie is a movie that we've been thinking about recording for a long time, and we're very happy to finally be presenting it. The movie is Annihilation.
By Alex Garland.
Yeah. And if you are anywhere other than the United States, you're probably viewing it on Netflix right now. But it is still not available in the United States. It is available on Amazon, though, and Hulu.
You bought it on Amazon, right?
I did. It's cheap. It's like well worth buying.
Well, especially because this movie is absolutely worth watching multiple times.
Oh, definitely. I think, hazard a guess as to how many times I've seen it now. Probably like 5 or 6 times.
Wow, yeah.
And every time you catch something new. And that's one of the great things about this movie, is just every time something a little bit different, some little secret.
I've been dying to rewatch this. I still haven't seen it since we saw it in theaters back in, February.
I can't believe that. It's crazy. So
I know,
you're in for a treat today.
Yeah, I've dwelt on this movie since then, and I'm really excited to watch it again and see what I get.
So one of the things I really like about this movie is the way that it combines multiple genres together. I mean, it's a sci-fi and a fantasy, which I think is usually something that seems mutually exclusive. Some sci-fi does range on the fantastical, like Star Wars.
Yeah.
I'd say probably more fantastical than sci-fi, as opposed to Star Trek, which is very heavy sci-fi.
But it still tries to base itself in the real world, real science, that kind of stuff.
Right, with elements of the fantastical mixed in.
Like Klingons.
Right. Yeah, that's just crazy.
Yeah.
Klingons.
Annihilation kind of delivers science in a fantastical kind of way. The things that you see in this movie really just take you into a fantastical place. So, like we've talked about in some of the movies before, is suspension of disbelief is always important. But they do such a great job of really convincing you this is the reality these people are living in.
Yeah, it's not until I'd say later in the film it gets very existential.
Yeah,
and that's something that you should be prepared for.
Yeah,
it's a film that is going to make you question who you are as a human and what it means to be a conscious individual. And man, a movie that does that is a movie well worth watching.
Yeah.
I mean, beyond that, it's just a pleasure to watch this movie, but the fact that it like takes you to that next level, the reason that they didn't release it, do a wide release to the world, they only did it in the United States, that small release, was because they did a study, which focus group, right,
yeah.
that came across most viewers. They came to the conclusion that they wouldn't like it because it was too heady.
Too smart for everybody.
Which is just ridiculous.
Yeah, because something that I've really seen in this movie with the people that I've discussed it with and the people that I've seen discussing this movie is everyone takes away something personal with this movie. So looking for personal meaning in this movie, I think, is a really rewarding way of looking at it.
And it's one of those films that when the credits come up, you sort of just stare at the screen in disbelief. And yeah, I didn't
speak for a while after we saw it.
You were speechless. You were having trouble making sentences.
Walked out of the theater just unable to comprehend.
Yeah. And I mean, it's no wonder that the focus group was like,
Yeah. Right after that movie, I wouldn't know what to say either.
They were mesmerized.
But I love it. I love this movie. I'm so excited we're going to watch it again today.
All right. So suppose we should set up our viewers a little bit.
Let's talk about some of the themes.
So, I mean, we already talked about how you should be aware that it's both sci-fi and fantastical. Neither one nor the other. You have to have a healthy helping of both.
Yeah, really try and understand it through both lenses is a good way to look at it. The mystery and the literal. It has both.
And speaking of the mystery, I mean, you're not going to understand the movie at first. It will most likely blow your mind, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of not understanding it first. This is a movie
It
you're
took
going
me
to
a
want
while
to watch again. And not only that, you're going to want to watch it with a friend because
Oh, yeah.
you may not be able to talk when you get out of it, but you're going to want to talk with somebody as soon as you're ready.
Yeah.
And experiencing it with somebody. I mean, any movie, going with somebody to the movies is always a pleasure. But this movie in particular is just, it begs to be discovered and talked about and picked apart. And then one more thing. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Well, and just watching this movie by yourself, it's hard to know what any of it really means because it might have deep personal meaning to you, but you ask someone else and they didn't get that. And being able to share the differences makes it such a more rewarding experience.
That's the beauty of an existential movie. It's innately personal.
Yeah, and this is certainly one of those.
And I guess the very last thing right before we start watching the movie is the definition of annihilation, which I found very fascinating.
Yeah. It's got two meanings.
Yeah, two very different and opposing meanings. Annihilation, the basic definition, which I'm sure most people know, is the utter destruction or obliteration of something, which is, basically taking something and making it nothing.
To wipe it from existence.
Yeah. And the other definition which is a physics definition, is the conversion of matter into energy.
Right. When two pieces of energy, pieces of matter and antimatter collide, they describe it as annihilation. It's complete disintegration into 100% energy. It's like the most efficient way of producing energy is annihilation.
Huh. I didn't know the exact scientific.
Yeah, that's the tie into physics. There is, it's the most efficient conversion into energy is matter and antimatter annihilating each other in a collision, in contact.
I think that's a great picture to have in your mind right before you're about to watch this movie. But just to go over that one more time, I mean, one definition means to destroy, and the other definition basically means to create. And so you have these completely conflicting definitions, and that's represented not only in the themes, but also in the characters themselves, and how people can be very different things, very conflicting things, and things that pull against each other and create chaos.
Yeah.
We're going to go watch Annihilation right now. At this point, go ahead and pause and come back in a little bit after you've finished. And we'll talk a little bit more about this fantastic movie. And once again, you can watch this movie on Amazon or Hulu, stream it for free, or you can watch it on Netflix if you're streaming it in a country that's not the U.S. So go ahead, check it out, and then meet us back here. All right, we're back, and whoa, that was a movie, huh?
We literally just finished watching it. So, like I was just saying, that's the second time that I've watched that movie. I forgot how tense that movie is. You were just gripped the entire time. I'm like, my body is still sort of in this state of stress from it.
Somehow that, and I mean, a lot of movies do this, but it transcends the screen and goes into your body, like, your mind and your body kind of dissolved as well as a lot of the characters did in this aftershock.
The way that it gets inside you is very gradual, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Which is funny because the way that it gets inside these characters is very gradual.
Right. Yeah, well, let's get into it.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, why don't you tell me, what do you think the entity was?
I don't know how to answer that question.
Yeah, and I think there are many different ways to answer it, and there are many different answers.
I don't think I can answer that question without going into what I think what's happening in the movie and like what this process is, because like in some ways you can read this thing as an alien that's mutating or like this force of nature, and I'm sure we'll get into all of this. But what I really got out of this this watch of the movie was a journey into the psyche, into the self, into the self-destructive parts that are inside all of us.
One of the things that is important, and I mean, we're trying to figure out what the entity is, the shimmer, but we see a lot of a reflection of these people. So, I mean, they're constantly saying, oh, it's a mirror, it mirrored me. And it's like we're getting to know this thing not through what it does to the surroundings, but more what it does to them. And so there's two things, I think. There's two different ways of seeing it, and I'll tell you which way I'm leaning after I explain both. So the first is, and I this is my first thought was that the entity is trying to understand life. And what it does is it creates this barrier. It's a cell, basically, right? And at the center is this nucleus. And when they go through this barrier, which is the shimmer, they go through the cell wall. It doesn't feel like they really invade it. It feels like it lets them in.
They're absorbed into it.
Yeah. And once you get inside of it, you're part of it. That's it. You're part of the shimmer as soon as you get in. And I think that really explains why Cain starts to die. His organs start to shut down as soon as he gets out of the shimmer, because he was part of it and he separated himself from it.
He's a kind of amputation.
Exactly. He amputated himself. So he started to die. Now, of course, that doesn't explain why once the shimmer disappears that he lives, but we can get into that in a little bit. The other way to look at it is that the shimmer isn't really a conscious entity. Now, in the first definition of it, in my mind, it sees things, it's trying to understand things, and so it mixes stuff together, mixing, until there's no difference between it and everything else around it. And that understanding is also an invasion. It's invading the earth, and it's doing it through understanding. And understanding is becoming.
Yeah.
All these things. Annihilation.
Well, the idea that it's just some force that's refracting and changing itself. It's almost as if reality and anti-reality meet into this new creation, into this bizarre thing that doesn't make sense to any sort of previous understanding, but it's new nonetheless.
I wanted it to be alive in the sense of a consciousness.
Right.
So,
you wanted it to
an
be like
intent.
us
Yeah.
in some way.
And you see that in the scientist at the end who's asking her all these questions, and he's like ascribing all of these intents to it. Like it was an invasion. It was attacking us. It was trying to absorb us all. Portman goes, no, I don't even think it knew I was there. So to go into my second definition of what I'm kind of leaning towards now, they're constantly talking about cancer cells. And
the very first scene of the movie, they're talking about cervical cancer.
Right. And cancer doesn't have intent, just like a bacteria or a virus doesn't have intent. It's just going through the motions, like a machine.
Simply cells dividing, and that's it.
Exactly. It's just telling itself to divide, and it's doing anything it has to divide. It's got a script, and that's what Lena does. She's a biologist who is looking into the script of the division of the cell, the life of the cell. And a script is something that you follow. There's no division from it. It's just going through the motions. And that's what this thing really feels like. It's a phenomenon, for sure. But as far as its intention, as far as if it has consciousness, I don't think it does. It's just a mirror, a funhouse mirror. And to think of it any other way is to romanticize it.
Well, you do what humans are always doing. You project. Right. You see this thing you don't understand, so you try and say, in what way is this, or is this not me? And you see that at the end of towards the end of the movie in the lighthouse, Cain's on video saying, am I you? Are you me?
Right.
He's even questioning that. To what extent are we different? I was really amused by that in this watch, because those are the kinds of questions, when you get really deep inside yourself, those are the questions that come up when you get to the center of what is you? What am I versus you? In what ways are we different? You get to the center of yourself like you get to the center of the shimmer, the center of the psyche. And the further in you go, the trippier things get. And you begin to question, am I even really here? And as the movie gets trippier and trippier, it mirrors the journey inside the self. That's really what I was getting at when we first started talking about this. Is I don't know if the shimmer is alive or conscious or just a phenomenon. And ultimately, I don't think it particularly matters to me, because what I see in this movie is a journey inside the self, a journey into self-destruction, into what scares us, into what keeps us going, into why do we die?
Yeah, and let's talk about that real quick. I mean, relating it quickly back to cancer. We talk about cancer cells, they are immortal. Those cervical cancer cells that they took from that woman back in the 60s or whatever, they're still dividing. They're still alive.
Yeah, and even Lena's character was reading The Immortal Cells of Henrietta Lacks, which is about that.
That's
that
the
instance.
woman. Yeah. Our own cells, which she mentions, are flawed. They have a flaw in our code, which eventually will make us die.
They're designed to self-destruct, as the psychologist says. Ventris, there we go. Yeah, she even says we're designed to self-destruct when they're talking about her husband, Lena's husband, going in and self-destructing,
Yeah, we have self-destructive tendencies. And, Ventris says it again at the very beginning when she's interviewing Lena. She talks about self-destruction and how it's built into all of us, not even, down to our genetic code, but also
into our behavior,
into our souls. And she even pokes directly at Lena and says, we mess up the perfect marriage. And it seems like she has that perfect marriage. And then she goes and has an affair with one of her coworkers.
Which is an incredibly self-destructive act. And why did you do that? It was an impulse.
And then clearly she was crazy in love with her husband.
And totally guilt-ridden after that had happened.
Yeah.
When she brings up self-destruction being written into our cells with her husband, Cain, as well. Because Cain's response is God doesn't make mistakes. The fact that we die is essential to being us. It's part of who we are. It's essential.
I do want to come back to that later.
Sure.
At the very end.
Okay.
As a last thought. There, but yes, there is a kind of poke of creationism.
Intelligent design.
But talking about how people can do opposing things. She loves her husband, and yet she destroys that, something that doesn't make sense. But we're more than one person. We're more than one thing, and we're opposing things. But we're also part of other people as well. I think a good thing to point out is the song.
The Crosby, Stills, and Nash song.
Mm-hmm. Helplessly Hoping. And specifically the chorus, which is they're one person, they're two alone, three together, and four. Number four, for each other.
I love that song.
Yeah, it's fantastic. The harmonization.
This movie turned me on to it, and the alliteration in it. It's beautiful. But that chorus, it is very indicative of a lot of things in this movie. The way that it divides this one thing, this couple, into four different things. They are one person. Together, they are one.
Yeah.
You are this unit as a couple, as a married couple. You've joined together. But they're two apart. They're two lone people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they still have their individuality, and yet, as you said, they share this common consciousness almost. And yet, there's also almost like that's like a veneer to something else, which is they're people for each other as well. They separate a part of themselves that they're just around each other. They're this person for each other. And then there's that secret part that they keep to themselves. And so there are all of these things.
Yeah.
So complex, and yet, just like the harmony of the song, they're weaved together, seemingly, inseparable, perfect.
I've thought a lot about that chorus of that song in relation to this movie, and one of the things that it really makes me think about is to what extent is the individual that as well? You know, to what extent do we keep secrets from ourselves? The parts of ourselves that sometimes we think about and other times we can't even look at.
Right.
The parts of ourselves that we won't interact with for fear of what will come up. So we tune it out with movies or music, you know. There are parts of the self, like this movie is telling us to look into the self, no matter how scary it may seem.
Right. And that self-destruction is a part of ourselves that is seemingly inseparable from ourselves. But I believe that's exactly what, first, each character destroys themselves because of that self-destruction in one way or another. And that's why nobody ends up coming back from the shimmer. But I think that's actually also how Portman ends up killing the shimmer. At the very end, which is just a very existential and complex and confusing scene.
Very symbolic, yeah.
They're mirroring each other. She's trying to escape, and then she realizes it's mirroring her, and so she relaxes and falls down, and it does too. Because by trying to force herself out the door, it's doing the same thing. It's pushing right against her, smashing her, smothering her.
The harder she fights, the harder it fights her.
Right. And so she just relaxes, which allows her to, get up and get that grenade. But what makes it take the grenade and stay there and let her go? And I think that what she's done, which is separate a part of herself, she separated that self-destruction from herself and gave it to the shimmer, just like Cain. The only difference is she gave up a part of herself and gave it to the shimmer, and Cain gave away his love for Lena kept self-destruction.
She gave away her self-destruction, whereas Cain kept it and destroyed himself.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. That idea of accepting your self-destruction, not trying to fight it anymore, I think is a real great theme that I've taken away from this movie. That I really appreciated it, is when she accepts her self-destruction, when she finally gives into it and decides not to fight it, she's able to give it away and look at herself. Right. That's when it takes her form, is when she finally gives it that self-destruction. She finally gives it the thing she was refusing to look at, and it destroys itself.
Yeah. The essence of the shimmer, right, is mixing things up, and it's almost undestroyable because it's literally consuming everything, and yet that becomes its its biggest strength, and that becomes its downfall, because once the actual nucleus of this cell is given self-destruction, which is something seemingly foreign to the shimmer, it can only destroy itself. It lights everything on fire, and then there's nothing left once the center of it is gone.
Yeah, what happens when you act that out?
Yeah. And I think lastly, to touch on the opposing forces inside of us, these existential themes, Portman's character is all of these different things, right? And that's what allows her to get to the end, to get to the center and survive this thing. Of course, she has to annihilate herself to do it. She has to cut out a piece of herself and change herself. She's not the same anymore, which she admits at the end. You're not Cain, and are you Lena?
She doesn't answer, but we see her eyes.
She's not.
No, she's changed because we're always changing. And when you go through something so extreme, when you go that deep inside yourself and you ask those questions and you really look at yourself that deeply, you can't come out the same person.
Well, and Lena was this soldier, a killer, but also a doctor, a scholar, a healer. All of these opposing things. And this love for her husband and love for another man, a love for self-destruction.
Or was the affair about not understanding her relationship well enough and a part of her wanting to destroy it? Because maybe she didn't deserve it, or she didn't appreciate what they did have, because the guy she was cheating off was like, look, you can't talk to your husband about your work, and he can't talk to you about yours.
Yeah.
I don't know if she ever really loved that guy. It didn't
Yeah,
seem like
I think I'm wrong. Yeah, I don't think she actually loved that guy.
it
but
was purely self-destruction towards herself
she
for something.
couldn't give up her individuality, I think, and
Right.
let go of what that meant to her. I mean, even when she's in the middle of the shimmer, they're going to go check and see if Cass is still alive. She says, I'll go alone. Why? Clearly there are things out here that will eat you alive. No, I'd rather go by myself. What sense does that make? But she's obsessed with keeping her individuality, even though she's given herself to somebody else, Cain. But, once again, we're all of these different things. And not accepting that you're not just one person, that you're a multitude of people, is self-destructive in itself. Or at least that's my understanding of what they're trying to say.
Seeing yourself as multiple people is self-destructive?
No, ignoring
the fact that you are
multiple people is self-destructive.
Yeah.
Because you're ignoring the different parts of yourself. Or at least that's what Lena does, and then it ends up biting her in the end. Well, in the beginning.
Right.
But that's what this movie feels like, right? That Ouroboros on her arm at the end.
Yeah, the snake eating itself in an infinity symbol.
Yeah. And there's all of those duplicates throughout the movie, right?
Yeah, it's a never-ending cycle of life and death, destruction and creation.
Yeah.
Annihilation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And coming back lastly to that intelligent design, I've talked about this before with literature of any kind, which includes written and film. When someone creates a piece of art, it's part of them, and they put it out into the world and they give it life, because art is life. And once it's separated from them, it's not theirs anymore. And it changes. Every person who sees it, the idea of it changes, gives it new life. It's different from every single perspective, and it grows. And I think that, like this movie, we look at it and we take a certain perspective on it, because we have a lot of different ideas about this movie and what it means and what it's trying to say. And yet all of those things are true and not wholly true at the same time. There's many different ways to look at it, and we change it. But at the same time, the existential nature of the movie changes us, right? We've been talking about how we see ourselves, and that's had an effect on us.
Yeah, I think the movie is designed to hold a mirror up to the self. This movie is about reflection, and what do humans do but project? This movie holds up these vague themes in front of us, and as we watch these people be destroyed, and we can't help but ask ourselves, in what way am I self-destructive? How does this make me feel as I watch these people? When a movie is this symbolic in the way that it explores something like self-destruction, you can't help but have a myriad of interpretations, because that's what it wants.
We change it, it changes us, and we annihilate each other.
All the time.
And so lastly, I'm going to try to connect this back. Just an idea. But the intelligent design. So we're talking about cells and cancer and life in the very beginning, and how it was one cell, and then it divided, and then it divided, and then it divided, and then all of this life came forth. And just like the shimmer, there's a romanticism about it. All of this life, all of this change happens, and it's beautiful. And there's an innate desire to ascribe intent to it, some sort of grand design. And yet it's very clear at the end, the way that Lena describes it, or at least the way the voice of the writer is trying to describe it, that there really was no intent of the shimmer. It really wasn't trying to destroy anything. It wasn't trying to understand through that destruction, through that change. It was just doing what it does.
It was just being.
It's just being. Just like a cell divides, there's no intent behind that, no consciousness. A cell just divides. That's how it's built. And so we talk about God, and they talk about God in the movie. God doesn't make mistakes. Well, I'd say that's romanticizing it a bit. So if we imagine that the first cell, the first life that appeared on the planet, it's just a single thing and it divided. There's no intent behind that. There's no consciousness. It just was.
Well, that gets pretty metaphysical, because at that point you have to ask yourself, what is consciousness?
Right. And I mean, I'm not saying that is my belief or my opinion, but clearly in my mind, I think the movie is trying to make that argument.
That there is no intent to the direction of the world?
That you can look at life and how it continues in two different ways. And I'm talking about life in the most basic sense, not humans. Humans have consciousness, and we're making things and we're changing them and observing them in all these different multitude of ways. I mean, that's creativity to another level. That's intent.
But like the overall direction of evolution.
Of life and evolution, you can either say there is a God, like the Shimmer. Shimmer is a God with a lowercase g, right? It does things that are unexplainable and all-powerful. And you can say that there was intention behind that the Shimmer had a consciousness and it was trying to understand or make change. And through that, it was doing all of these crazy things, pushing all of these things together and annihilating everything. Or you could say it was a phenomenon and it didn't really have intention. It was just doing what it does, what it was built to do, however it was created in the first place. It was just acting. There was no understanding in it. It just mirrored. It just did. Like Natalie Portman says, I don't think it knew I was there. It wasn't trying to hurt me. It wasn't trying to kill me. It mirrored her.
Well, I think you can make a similar case in favor of an idea of the universe being God.
You can go either way.
Right. It is both. God is this thing that just creates and observes and watches and is and mirrors and shows, understands. But it's also just this thing that just sits there while things happen. We're all in this mind that is God. Just as within the Shimmer, they were all in the sphere of this thing's creation, because it was separate from the natural world that we were in.
So let's go back to God doesn't make mistakes. So you can say that God doesn't make mistakes because he is all-powerful and all-knowing, or you can say God doesn't make mistakes because God is the universe and mistake brings intent, and there is no intent.
There is just what happens.
Is.
Reality is, period.
Yeah. Either way. You can go either way, and we've been doing it this entire movie.
Since we saw it back in February.
From Human Existence. Yeah.
I mean, having this discussion since we saw it back in February.
Oh, yeah.
We've gone from one end to the other at times in our thoughts and feelings about this movie. It is that reflective.
As I was saying, that reflection, I first decided that it was intent, that it had emotion or a consciousness, because I was romanticizing it. I wanted it to be a thing, and that was a reflection of me wanting there to be an intent in this God, this Shimmer entity.
Yeah, and I think I don't see a difference between it being God and a phenomenon. I feel as though I sit in the middle and see both of them as equal, as happening at the same time. Yeah. We're all moving about in our polarity and where we stand on any particular issue and how we feel and the environment around us. This time as I watched it, that's kind of where I ended up with it and my relationship to the Shimmer.
Well, and I can tell you, like I said in the first half of the podcast, every time I watch this, every time I get something different, a different feeling. There's a lot of emotion in this movie.
Yeah, there is.
And it reflects a lot of yourself back at you.
Yeah, and it does.
At seeing something different every time could be just seeing where you are in the moment, seeing yourself.
Just seeing different parts of yourself at any given time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Well.
All right. Well,
wrap that up.
I hope that you all enjoyed the movie as much as we did, and I hope that you have somebody to talk to about it after you're done. Because
we hope you watch it again, because like we were just saying, it's always going to give you something new.
Yeah, I can't see how you'd be able to finish this movie and not want to watch it again.
Right.
In the near future. I don't know. There are some movies, you get to the end and you're like, I just want to watch that movie again right now.
It was 4 months between my viewings. That was crazy. I thought about this movie so much in the meantime.
Right.
This was a very rewarding rewatch.
But not something that you want to watch again right after. It's too...
No. I might need to sit on this one for another 4 months.
Yeah. Melts your brain.
It does. I'm surprised we were able to have this discussion right after watching it.
Well, there's a surreal kind of feeling, right?
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Couch Theater. My guest and our creative consultant is Greg Dernbach. Artwork by Robot, who you can follow on Instagram at 20th Century Robot. All episodes are written and produced by me, Stefan Cowper, along with a few questionable bass lines. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen to us on YouTube, or you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, all under Couch Theater. We hope that you enjoyed this week's episode and that you come back next week for another movie and another conversation.